So yeah, today I'm excited to tell you guys about configuring execution packages and the scheduler service. We're going to go through setting up the service account and all these different pieces that are necessary. We'll also talk about different settings and configuration you'll want to make for setting up your execution packages properly. Before we jump in, I did want to mention one piece here. We have set up a community topic for TimeXtender Tuesdays. This is a great place to go in and put in feedback, ideas for mini lessons, questions for Stump the Chump, anything that you want to see covered in a TimeXtender Tuesday session, or if you just want to come in here and chat with other like-minded folks, you can do so. You can actually let me walk you through this, and I'll show you how you can subscribe to this topic. So if you go to support.timextender.com and you log in there, let's give that just a second, and then you click on Ask the Community, and you can click on the TimeXtender Tuesdays topic right there. So from here, you can actually go through and so this will allow you to follow new posts and comments as they're made. So we'll be going through, we're adding all of the sessions that we do in here. Once they're completed, any planned ideas, you can see them in the list here. Again, if you want to make some suggestions, put in some ideas, please feel free to just go in here and we built the TimeXtender reference architecture, Azure VM, project repository in the cloud, data lake, SQL database using Azure Data Factory, and analysis services. So what we're going to do today is we're going to set up the scheduler service in the Azure VM to orchestrate all of these pieces, to get them to refresh on a specific schedule. So I did want to show this reference architecture to kind of explain exactly what that means. So when we schedule an execution package, what that is doing is essentially it's loading the data through all of these different layers here, and then scheduling that occurrence for that to happen. So scheduling that refresh of data, so we can get new fresh data from the sources into these various different areas here. So if you are going to follow along with the session or on the recording, you do need a couple things to have in place before that. Of course, you need a TimeXtender environment up and running. You want to have that running and available. And you also need permissions to access and create user accounts on your server where you're working, because we are going to create a service account today, and we're going to need to set that up as a administrator on that machine. So make sure you do have the permissions to be able to do that first. Okay, let's go ahead and jump right in. So the first thing that we need to do here is to create a service account. We're going to then assign that service account to the proper project repository. We're going to configure the scheduler service. We're going to review task schedules first in the ODX. We're going to create a project perspective, which we're going to use within our execution package when we create this execution package here and configure that. And then, of course, we're going to schedule that package as well. So let me open up the virtual machine, the app server we created. Again, just a few sessions back. I can find that here. Okay. Let's make sure I am using serverless. Remember those pause after hours. So let's make sure I got those spun back up. Okay, good. My databases are running. Project repository is running. Looks like everything is great there. Let me close some of these tabs, and then we can open up some new ones as needed. All right. First things first, we want to create that service account. So I'm going to right click on the start menu and go to computer management. From computer management, I can create local users and groups. And so we're going to expand this, go to users. We have these users in here, and I want to add a new user. So I'll click on new user. Now, I am doing this on local accounts. Now, typically in a real production environment with a data warehouse, you're going to be using Active Directory. And if you're operating in the cloud, you're likely going to be using Azure Active Directory. So I'm not going to show setting that up in Active Directory today. That's a little bit beyond the scope of this session. So I'm just going to be using local accounts for this session. Click on New User there, and we're going to call this TX Prod Service. Okay, and we have we don't need to put in a full name or a description, but I am going to put in a password here. Okay, and I'm going to change these settings there and click Create. Great. So I have my TX Prod service created. The next thing I need to do is I need to put this in the administrators group. This is going to allow this service to access all the files that it needs to be able to, of course, manage schedules and do other things as well for us. So we're going to go to groups. We have our administrators group, and I'll click Add to Group. Click Add. We want, again, TX Prod Service. Check names, and here we have a TX Prod service. Great. So now I've added that into the administrators group. The next step is to assign this new service account to the proper project repository. Now, when a service like the scheduler service runs, it's essentially opening a micro version of TimeXtender that needs to access the metadata available in the project repository. And of course, if you've ever installed TimeXtender for the very first time from scratch, you know the very first thing that happens. The configuration dialog pops up and it asks you to configure a project repository. Essentially, TimeXtender is asking me, hey, tell me where all of my project metadata is, right? So when this service account, TX Prod Service, runs the scheduler service, Windows service, the first thing it's going to ask is, where is my project metadata? So we have to first tell the TX Prod service account where that metadata is. And let me show you how to do this. So I'm going to minimize TimeXtender there. We'll just keep that in the background. Now I want to open TimeXtender again as that user, that TX Prod service user. So I'm going to go into Program Files, go into TimeXtender, find the proper version, 20.10.14 was what we're running here, and then find the TimeXtender.exe. I'm going to hold the Shift key on my keyboard, right-click, and click this option, Run as Different User. Okay, so here I can actually run TimeXtender as that TX Prod service. TX, I think we do need to define the domain, which is just local in this case, TX Prod service. And then password, and click OK. All right, so this will open up the TimeXtender application as TX Prod service. I then will be asked, hey, where is my project metadata? Also, I'll be asked, where is my ODX server? Do I have one? In this case, I'm running it locally, so I'll call this localhost. And the password, let me find that saved somewhere. I do have that over here. Put that password in there and get connected. Great. So define the ODX server and then define the project repository. Again, my project repository is in the clouds in Azure, so I need to copy that server name here. And we're using SQL authentication. Okay, put in my username and password. And then I can just hit the drop down to find that database, TX project repository. Okay, so we'll test the connection. We're connected. Good. I'll hit next. And now I can start the Windows Services Management. So this will allow me to configure the scheduler service to run using my new service account that I just created. So what I just did, again, I opened TimeXtender as the service account. and then define both my ODX and my project repository. So that information is going to get saved in a config file on that service account's user profile on the Windows machine. And so the next time that service account runs TimeXtender or one of its services, it's going to know where that project repository is. Go ahead and hit finish and let yes, and then it'll open the services configuration. Great. So here I have the TimeXtender scheduler 20.10.14. And here I can, of course, edit that. And we want this to run as my new service account. So I'll put in here TX prod service and the password. And the startup type, of course, we want this to be running in the background. We want our schedules to run. So I'm just going to set this as automatic. However, an important thing is we also want to make sure that any other services might be running as well first, so we can set this to automatic delayed. It's going to add just about a little bit of a delay there to start the service. That's always a good option too. Okay, so I want to also select start restart service when I click OK. And great, so I have the service updated successfully. It's now has been granted the logon as service right. And it's started. Okay, great. So our scheduler service has started. And it's running using that new service account we created. So whenever that service, the scheduler service runs, it's going to know exactly where my metadata is. Okay, now that I have done this, I want to close this window because again, I don't want to normally run TimeXtender as the service account. I only want to run services as the service account. So I can go ahead and close this and then continue operating TimeXtender as myself. All right, what are the next steps here? So we've configured the scheduler service. We're going to review the ODX tasks, and then of course add a project perspective. So let's jump in.
So Joseph, if we could just slide a question in here from Rory. Would it not be better to grant the service account access to the repository instead of using a hard-coded SQL Server account?
That would be great too. I'm not using Azure Active Directory right now, so I'm not able to do that. Of course, if you have Azure Active Directory set up in your environment, then absolutely. If you're using a local SQL Server or a SQL Server on some local hardware, on-prem SQL Server, you can of course use regular traditional Active Directory and grant user rights to the repository that way as well. So that is another way to do it. Some do believe that Windows or integrated security is a bit more secure. So that's typically what you'll see out there in production environments. That is, again, absolutely a great approach if you have all those pieces running using Active Directory. So yes, great question. Again, in this example, I'm not using Active Directory, which is why I'm using the SQL logins. So thank you. Cool. All right, so we're going to continue on here. The next thing I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about ODX task schedules. So let me go ahead and click Manage the ODX. We'll open this up. If you remember, we did add this. We have a data source. We have a task here. Let's go in and just kind of take a look so we understand what's going on. So important thing to understand is when you're loading data using the ODX server, you're loading that from the source using a task schedule. So in here, and that's going to be running as the ODX service, not necessarily the scheduler service. So in here, we have a transfer task. This is my transfer task, and I can click on Manage Task Schedule. And we see this task already has a schedule, and it's set to run at midnight every day of the week. So this will run every day of the week at midnight. I can hit start again every few minutes. I can run it once an hour or whatever I need. But that's how we set up the schedules for our loads, again, from the source into the ODX. Now, it's important to know when our ODX schedules are currently scheduled to run, because that's going to help us determine when we want our other schedules, our data warehouse schedules to run, because we want to run our data warehouse schedules after the ODX schedules have completed. Do I want to reload the window? Sure. Okay. All right. So we know that we have these schedules running at midnight, right? So we can view the execution log. Again, I don't think I've left this machine running over midnight, so probably won't see any scheduled tasks in there, just because, again, I haven't left this machine running over midnight, so we don't have that. But let's say our task, our load of this SQL Server typically takes us about 30 minutes, right? So we want to give a little bit of buffer in there so we can start our data warehouse tasks at about 12:45. Now, anytime the data warehouse loads data from the ODX, it's just going to pull the most recent version of data that's available. So we can run a schedule in our data warehouse anytime we want. Just know that if it's run also at midnight, it's probably going to pull the prior day's version of data. So just be aware of that's how that works. So next thing I'm going to do is we want to create a project perspective. I'll talk a little bit about project perspectives and what those do. So here in project perspectives, I'm going to edit a perspective, and then I'm going to click add. I want to call this sales. I'm going to base it off of my sales model, and I'll expand. We see all of our tables here, and then I'll expand my semantic models. So I want to check sales, right? And I want to make sure that all the tables that feed this semantic model are also refreshed, are also included in this perspective, right? So I check dynamic perspective, and that, as you can see, automatically is going to select all of the tables that feed this model. Now, it just so happens that all the tables I have in here are feeding this model, so all of them are checked. However, if I had some additional tables that did not feed the sales model, those would not be checked in this case, right? So this is dynamically selecting tables for me to be included in this perspective. This is a really fun feature. Click OK here. We can use this to filter down our projects. When we hit use dynamic perspective, it'll only show the objects available in that perspective. Now the next piece is we want to use that in an execution package. So let's open our execution tab here. Let's create a new package. I'm going to call this package sales, and I can go in and I can select and drag in specific objects that I want to execute, right? But we know I want to execute all my sales model and, of course, all the objects that feed that sales model. So I'm going to simply drag in my sales project perspective. So this is going to always ensure that all the tables that are feeding my sales model get executed as part of this package. I can determine my max threads here. Again, this is going to be based on your environment. I suggest a lot of troubleshooting and get a baseline for how fast your projects are running, and then try to increase the threads or decrease the threads to try to get the most optimal thread count for your environment. Every environment is different. I typically recommend starting around 5 and then adjust from there. You can go up, you can go down, but it really depends on the speed of your database, speed of your machine, so on and so forth. The next is managed execution. Now, by default, when you create a package, managed execution is disabled. And this means that it will not take into account dependencies. It will not take into account speed or anything like that. You almost always want to change this to execution time. So any of these other options other than disabled are going to first and foremost take into account dependencies, ensuring that dependent objects always get executed first. And so you have the data you need to do lookups and other things. Execution time will further reorder those tasks to ensure that your overall execution is completed as fast as possible. It runs the longest running tasks earlier on, which is, again, going to make that overall execution more. So those are a couple of tips for creating your execution packages. You can set up retries. There's a lot of other settings. Recommend going through the training if you want to learn more about that. So I will go ahead and hit OK to create that package. It's going to say deployment is needed before the change will have an effect. Now, this is important. I want to touch on why it is saying this. And that is because when the scheduler service runs and it picks up the next scheduled execution, what version of a project is it going to execute? Is it always going to execute the latest version? Is it going to execute a few versions back? The way that the scheduler service works is it actually executes the last deployed version of a project. That's why you see this notification. You want to be sure that you deploy your project anytime you're making changes to the package. That will define the execution that's actually run, because again, it's looking at the latest version of the project, latest deployed version of your project. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. I know that I haven't made any changes in here. So what I can do is I can simply go to, I can right click on the project itself, go to advanced and click save project as deployed version. This is going to create a deployed version for me. We'll go ahead and hit save. And again, now I have a deployed version and I have an execution package, and now I want to schedule that package. So I'll add a schedule. I'll say I want to run this daily, and we want to run at 0:45, right? 45 minutes after midnight. Okay, and we can say 23, and let's run it every 4 hours. All right, we'll refresh that data every 4 hours. Click OK. Now I have my schedule running. And I want to, of course, save those changes again. And I have my schedule. And so the scheduler service that's running is going to pick up the next schedule, and it's going to attempt to run, again, whatever is defined within this execution package for me during that next schedule. Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left for Q&A and a quick stump the chump. Yeah, sorry that took so long, but I did want to go over all the different working pieces. I thought that was important for setting up the scheduler service. So thanks, everybody.
Hey, once you get on a roll, it's hard to stop. So Taylor, do we have any questions?
Yeah, thanks. Just one from Rob. Can you configure the data warehouse schedule to run on completion of the ODX server load, instead of assuming it is complete within a certain period of time?
That is a great question. Unfortunately, that's not currently possible in the current version of TimeXtender. Our product team is working hard on adding that functionality, essentially having managed execution across all the areas, including the ODX and the data warehouse. Right now, we're kind of dependent on the ODX being a separate execution system. However, closer to the end of the year, we will have managed execution done throughout the entire lineage of the project. So good question. Thank you.
Great. Well, at this point, let's go ahead and invite Chris. Thanks for joining us, Chris. If you want to go ahead and just introduce yourself and maybe say where you're calling from and what's your question.
Yeah, so I'm Chris, calling in from Phoenix. I'm with Point B, which is a consulting firm that we focus on delivering human-centered solutions across a wide variety of industries. I'm based out of our Phoenix office. I'm a senior consultant on our data and analytics team, and I recently had the pleasure of partnering with Taylor and Joseph with delivering at one of our clients. So my question is, it might not be that big of a stumper, but it is something that is that I'm very interested in hearing your perspective on. What's the best practice for monitoring the success of end-to-end jobs on kind of a daily basis, or whatever the schedule, whatever the refresh schedule is? So looking at did all of your ODX tasks execute successfully? Did your schedule package execute successfully? And then the follow-up question to that is, if something doesn't work, what's the best practice for getting the data kind of caught back up to where it should be if something fails out? And yeah.
Awesome. Great question. No, I really appreciate you adding that in, because monitoring is a big part of any data warehouse execution, and having that scheduled. You want to be able to monitor those loads and take a look at those whenever you can. So great question. Now there's a couple ways to do it within the application. You can actually monitor here. I'm going to go ahead and hit manage, and I'm going to reorder these tabs. So we have our different areas in the ODX. Again, these are separate executions right now. We are working on merging the two, but right now they're monitored separately. So we have our ODX loads. We can go in here, we can view the execution log. We can kind of see where that's at. We can also see in here, it'll say running, and then it'll say completed when it's done. That's, of course, if you have the UI open. Now, if you want to monitor that, say offline, say prod server's running somewhere else, and you want to monitor that remotely, you can absolutely do so using the user portal. So we go to portal.timextender.com, and I think I can sign in here. Trying to remember the username I used for this. I think it's this one. All right, so once you're signed in, you can go in here to the user portal, you click on ODX and then projects, and then you can go into the projects and see the details. You can see the details of all of your tasks. So this is my SQL Server data source, and these are the two tasks that you saw in that project. So I have SQL Server and then my two tasks, right? So we can see here the status of my load. So if I hit execute in the ODX, we're going to see a little bar here that's showing, hey, it's executing, it's been running for this long, and we see the duration and when it was last completed. So that's how we can monitor the ODX. If we need to get into a little bit more detail, there are ways to kind of a bit of a workaround right now, but you can see a lot more detail if you go in and actually query the ODX backlog. So if you go into the knowledge base and you type in backlog, let's see here, how to query the ODX backlog SQLite database. So this is a KB article that's describing how to get more details on your task executions. And then you can actually see that by running some queries against that backlog database file. So we can see history, we can see a list of data source and tables, and we can see last run status. So that'll be pretty helpful for us as well. Okay, so we covered ODX. I know we're running out of time here. Real quickly, let's jump into this piece. So ODX and now data warehouse executions. We can monitor these. Again, if you have the application open, you can view the execution history log. You can see the Gantt chart and execution messages here. You can also query this repository as well, the data warehouse repository. So we see monitor executions. Let's see what we can find here. Nope. Execution details SQL query. So here we have this KB article here. Again, you can use this SQL query to query the project repository, which will give you much more detailed and instantly up-to-date details of where these execution packages are by each object, each table, how long it's been running, where it might have hung up, if it's taking a long time, and then last time it completed. So you have all those details available in there. So we can post these links, of course, in the chat. We'll try to get those out for you, and we'll include them, of course, in the TimeXtender Tuesdays community topic, as well as the YouTube video description. So great question.
Thanks, everybody, for joining. Sorry to go over by a couple of minutes, but we're going to have the video posted for you a little bit later today, and we'll send out an email reminder about that tomorrow. So until 2 weeks from now, thanks for joining us at TimeXtender Tuesdays.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.